welcome back to my channel, From Dream to Seed, where you'll find brief, easy to follow, and beginner-friendly gardening videos. In today's video, I wanted to talk about soil testing, what it is, why you should do it, and who should do it. So I wanted to kind of bring you along today because I'm going to actually be doing some soil testing soon of a new in-ground garden bed that I just put in, and this is going to be for blueberries. Now, I had my soil tested about a year ago this time, and it told me what I needed to do to the soil, what amendments I needed to add to help me make this soil more productive for blueberries. So first, let's talk about what is soil testing. Soil testing is exactly as it sounds. It is a test that you can run on soil. It is great for home gardeners, and it will tell you some really key things about your soil that will help to increase the success of your gardening. So the three main things that I look for when I'm soil testing are the pH of the soil, the key nutrients of the soil, the main nutrients that the plant needs, and also I like to test for organic matter in my soil, because a lot of things like blueberries and vegetables and fruits and the things that I like to grow prefer to be grown in lots of organic matter. So let's talk about the pH of the soil. So if you think back to high school chemistry class and you learned about the pH scale, you know that 7 on a pH scale is about neutral. That's about the pH of water. If you go higher on the pH scale, you're going to get into more alkaline, and if you go lower on the pH scale, you're going to be getting into the acidic range. And most plants, especially growing fruits and vegetables, like neutral to slightly acidic soil. So somewhere in between that 6.0 to 7.0 range. However, things like blueberries, they prefer a very, very acidic soil, that sort of 4.5 to 5.5 range. And so these are actually my soil test results that I got for this area. And it showed me that my pH was about 7.4, which is way too high for blueberries. So I made some amendments to this soil. It sat for about a year, and I'm going to be retesting soon to see if I need to continue to add some amendments to lower the pH, or if I'm ready to plant. So let's talk about how you soil test. Most places you can contact your local extension office. This is what I did. And they will tell you the procedures for soil testing. So you can Google local extension office. And they will either give you a bag to put your soil sample in, or you can bring, sorry, it's super windy today. Or you can bring in a sample in like an old Tupperware container for them to test. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get kind of samples from across the area that you're growing in, and you don't want to mix areas. So I'm growing blueberries here, and I want to specifically do one soil test for this area. I don't want to mix soil from where I grow my blueberries versus where I grow my regular fruits and my regular vegetables, because the pH needs for those are very, very different. So what I did is this is a sample from kind of across this area of where I'm growing the blueberries, and I will mix that together. I'm going to let it dry up a little bit because the soil's pretty wet today, and then I'm going to send in that sample, and it will tell me the pH of that soil. Another thing that soil testing tells you are some key nutrients that the plant needs to survive, particularly your phosphorus and your potassium. Now, nitrogen is another nutrient that plants need to survive, but there's no reliable way to test for the nitrogen in the soil because it breaks down so quickly. So a lot of times in the soil sample recommendations, they will tell you if you need to add potassium, if you need to add phosphate, and they will just give you a general guideline of the amount of nitrogen that you need to add. So for example, this is where I tested last year, and it told me that not only was my pH too high, but that my potassium was too high as well. And that's probably because I originally had some apple trees in this area, and I was probably giving my plants a little bit too much love and over fertilizing, which can also be bad for your plants. So I didn't really, when I was amending the soil, I didn't really need to go back in and add a lot of fertilizer that had potassium or even really phosphate in it, because that was the levels were okay. So I just focused on adding organic matter and adding nitrogen to the soil. So that will tell you, this soil testing will tell you what amendments you need to make as far as fertilization goes, because those plants really need that nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium to grow. There's other nutrients that they need as well, and you can also test for those as well, but those are the three main ones. And then another thing that I like to check for is organic matter. Now, I live in a new build neighborhood where they scrape the topsoil off when they are grading the sites. So I have little to no organic matter in my soil. If I were to dig up my soil just straight underneath the yard, it is heavy, heavy clay. It is very, very light in color, and that's not really what I want for growing berries. So what you see here is I've prepped these beds, and they're about a year old now. And in my next video, I'll explain how I prepped my in-ground beds. But you can see on top here, it's very, very dark, and this is just compost. I've put in a lot of compost in this area. I've done a one-time till-in, and this will add a lot of organic matter to my soil. So when I do my next soil test, that will tell me if I need to add more, hopefully not. But the numbers for my organic matter should be a lot better. So let's talk about who needs to do soil testing. I would recommend, if you were putting in a new in-ground garden bed, that you test your soil first, because you don't want to just assume it needs a lot of nutrients. If it doesn't, you don't want to just assume that your pH is good or high or low just because of the area you're in. If you've had in a new build neighborhood like me, where the soil quality is probably fairly low, if you have bought land that used to be farmed or things like that, there's a good chance that your soil will be low in a lot of the things that it needs, or maybe even too high in some of the things that it needs. In my area, the soil tends to be very alkaline because we have a lot of limestone in this area. And so it's not uncommon for us to have to lower the pH of the soil in order for plants to be productive. Another group of people that would want to soil test would be those who have had in-ground garden beds for about for 3 to 5 years, which is about how often you want to retest your soil, is every 3 to 5 years. So if you've had an in-ground bed and you've been fertilizing or adding amendments to the soil, it's a really good idea that you retest that soil every 3 to 5 years. Also for raised beds, I don't know that I would necessarily do it when you first put in your raised beds unless you're using a lot of native soil, but I would every so often I would test the soil in your raised beds to see what sort of amendments need to be made. So now that you've got your soil test results back, what do you do with them? Well, the soil testing, at least the one that I had done, was really specific in the rates and the amounts of fertilizer that I should put down, the percentages of organic matter that I should put in. But let's say your pH was really high like mine. Well, to lower the pH, you're going to want to add things like sulfur. And it will give you a certain amount to add, and that will, you add a certain amount of sulfur to decrease the numbers of your pH per point, I guess. Say your pH is really, really low and you're wanting to raise that pH, then you would add things like lime. And then as far as nutrient deficiencies go, the recommendations on the soil testing should tell you the amount per square foot or per acre that you should add of nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium. So there's soil testing in a nutshell. I hope you guys learned something. It's not as intimidating as it sounds. It sounded very intimidating to me at first, but it's a fairly easy procedure. And like I said, if you have any questions and you live near me and you'd like to know how to get soil testing done, I'll be happy to answer them for you. Otherwise, like I said, I would Google your local extension office number and call them, and they'll be happy to give you some directions on how to get some soil testing done. So thanks for being with me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave me comments if you have any suggestions for new videos or any questions that you have. And I will see you guys next time. Thanks. Bye.